She stands before 200 vampires who've heard centuries of music. One wrong note, and she's just meat on a monster's arm. But when her fingers touch the keys, even immortals remember what it means to feel. Lady Victoria's eyes flash with rage. This human just changed everything. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The auction hall reeked of desperation and expensive cologne. Clarissa stood on the platform in a dress that barely qualified as clothing, shivering despite the oppressive heat from too many bodies packed into the gilded room. Her wrists were bound with velvet rope, soft enough not to mark, but strong enough to remind her exactly what she was. Property, the auctioneer's voice droned on about her qualities. 23 years old, excellent health, no family to claim her, skilled in music and languages, virgin. That last word made her want to vomit. The crowd leaned forward, interest sharpening in eyes that glowed wrong in the candlelight. She'd learned 3 weeks ago that monsters were real, that vampires existed, that the debt her dead father owed meant she belonged to them now. The bidding started at 50,000. Her stomach twisted. 100,000. A woman in red silk raised her paddle, smiling like a cat. 200,000. A man with silver hair and cruel eyes. Clarissa kept her gaze fixed on the back wall, trying to disappear inside her own mind. The strategy that had kept her sane through examination after examination by creatures who saw her as meat. 300,000. The room went quiet. Every head turned toward the back corner where shadows gathered thick despite the chandeliers. He sat alone in the darkness, one leg crossed over the other, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than the entire auction. Even from across the room, Clarissa felt the weight of his attention like ice water down her spine. The auctioneer's voice wavered. "Lord Donovan, welcome. It's been many years since you've graced us with your presence. Do I hear 350? The vampire in the shadows didn't move, didn't speak, but somehow his voice carried through the hall anyway. 5 million. The room exploded into whispers. The auctioneer stammered, 5 million, going once. The woman in red dropped her paddle. The silver-haired man's face went purple with rage, but he didn't counter. No one did. Going twice. Clarissa's heart hammered against her ribs. She finally looked at him, really looked, and immediately wished she hadn't. He was beautiful the way winter was beautiful. Deadly, perfect, absolutely merciless. Dark hair fell across a face carved from pale marble, and his eyes, even from this distance she could see they were the color of frozen lakes. Going 3 times, sold to Lord Donovan Blackthorne. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. Clarissa's knees buckled. 2 guards caught her before she hit the floor, dragging her off the platform toward the back rooms where purchases were processed. She caught one last glimpse of him before the door closed. He hadn't moved, hadn't even stood, just sat there in his shadows like a king on a throne, and she realized with growing horror that she'd been bought by something far more dangerous than any vampire in that room. She'd been bought by one they all feared. The processing room was sterile and cold. They removed her bonds, gave her a robe that actually covered her body, and made her sign papers, transferring ownership. Her hand shook so badly the signature was barely legible. A woman with kind eyes but vampire stillness offered her water. "Drink, child. You'll need your strength. Lord Blackthorne's estate is 3 hours from here." "What's he like?" The words escaped before Clarissa could stop them. The woman's expression shuddered. "Old, very old, and very particular about his possessions." She paused, something almost like pity crossing her face. "He hasn't taken a human into his household in 70 years. The last one." She didn't finish, didn't need to. The door opened. A man entered, tall and lean with brown hair and eyes that held centuries. He wore a driver's uniform, but the way he moved spoke of violence barely contained. "Miss Clarissa, I'm Thomas, Lord Blackthorne's steward, if you'll come with me." The December air hit her like a slap when they stepped outside. Snow had started falling, fat flakes that stuck to her hair and melted against her still flushed skin. The car waiting at the curb was a vintage Rolls-Royce, black as midnight, gleaming despite the weather. Thomas opened the back door. She hesitated. "This is real, isn't it? This is actually happening." "I'm afraid so, miss." His voice was gentle despite what he was. "But Lord Blackthorne is not cruel, merely exacting." That didn't make her feel better. The interior of the car smelled like leather and something else, something cold and ancient that made her skin prickle. The door closed with a sound of absolute finality. Through the tinted window, she watched the auction house recede. Inside, other girls were still being sold to creatures that fed on blood and fear. She should feel lucky, should feel grateful she'd been bought by someone wealthy and powerful. Instead, she felt like she was riding toward her execution in the most expensive hearse money could buy. The city gave way to countryside. Snow covered everything, transforming the landscape into something from a fairy tale, the kind where the princess doesn't get saved. Thomas didn't speak during the drive. Clarissa was grateful. Her mind was racing too fast for conversation anyway. $5 million. What did someone who spent $5 million on a human slave expect in return? The answer made her stomach churn. She wrapped the robe tighter around herself, suddenly colder than the temperature could account for. After 2 hours, the roads became private. Tall iron gates opened at their approach, revealing a driveway lined with bare trees that looked like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. Then the house came into view. House was too small a word. Estate, manor, castle, none of them fit either. It was massive, built from dark stone that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. Towers rose at each corner, windows glowing with warm light that should have been welcoming but somehow made everything worse. This was a place where beautiful things came to die. The car stopped at the front entrance. Thomas opened her door. Clarissa forced herself to move, to step out into snow that immediately soaked through the thin slippers they'd given her. The cold was clarifying, sharpening her focus. She was terrified, yes, but she was also alive. And as long as she was alive, she could fight, even if fighting meant learning to survive. The massive front doors opened before they reached them. A woman stood in the entrance, older looking, human by the warmth in her cheeks and the rhythm of her breath. She wore a housekeeper's uniform, black dress with white apron, and her gray hair was pulled into a severe bun. "You'll be Clarissa." Her accent was Irish, soft around the edges. "I'm Mrs. Flynn, head of household staff. Come in before you catch your death." The entrance hall stole her breath. Marble floors, soaring ceilings painted with frescoes of scenes she didn't recognize, a chandelier that must have held 1,000 candles worth of electric lights. Tapestries older than countries hung on the walls. This wasn't a house, it was a museum. "Where is he?" Clarissa asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "Lord Blackthorne is in his study. He'll send for you when he's ready." Mrs. Flynn's expression softened. "For now, let's get you warm and fed and into proper clothes." She followed Mrs. Flynn up a grand staircase, down corridors lined with portraits of people in clothing from every century going back to medieval times. The faces all shared something. Those same ice-blue eyes. "Your room." Mrs. Flynn opened a door. Clarissa stepped inside and stopped. The room was bigger than her entire apartment had been. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, hung with midnight blue curtains. A fireplace crackled with real flames. Windows overlooked grounds that seemed to stretch forever into darkness. And everywhere, beautiful things. Books, paintings, a vanity with more cosmetics than she'd ever owned. "There's a bathroom through there," Mrs. Flynn gestured. "Take as long as you need. I'll have dinner sent up. Tomorrow we'll discuss your duties and the household rules." "Duties, right." Clarissa's voice sounded hollow. Mrs. Flynn paused at the door. "He's not what you think, child. Lord Blackthorne hasn't harmed a human in my 30 years of service. He's cold, yes, and demanding, but not cruel." She met Clarissa's eyes. "Whatever you're imagining, it's likely worse than reality." "Then why did he buy me?" "That," Mrs. Flynn said quietly. "I suspect even he doesn't fully know." The door closed. Clarissa stood alone in her golden cage, shaking not from cold but from the weight of everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, she'd woken in a holding cell. Now she stood in a room that belonged in a palace, owned by a vampire lord who'd paid $5 million for reasons no one understood. She moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. Outside, snow fell heavier now, covering the world in white, beautiful and deadly and absolutely unforgiving, like him. Somewhere in this enormous house, Donovan Blackthorne sat in his study, and Clarissa knew with bone-deep certainty that eventually he would send for her, and when he did, her real nightmare would begin. The bath was almost too hot, but Clarissa didn't care. She sank into water that smelled of lavender and something else, something expensive she couldn't name, and let herself shake apart where no one could see. The tears came silently. She'd learned years ago to cry without sound. Her father had demanded it. Strange how that skill was useful now. When the water finally cooled, she dried off with towels softer than anything she'd ever owned and found clothes laid out on the bed. Not the revealing scraps from the auction, but real clothing. Silk pajamas in deep emerald, a robe of cashmere that wrapped her in warmth, even slippers lined with fur. Someone had been in her room while she bathed. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt oddly numb. Dinner arrived on a silver tray carried by a young woman who couldn't have been older than Clarissa. She had warm brown skin and kind eyes, human eyes. "I'm Elise," the girl said softly, setting the tray on a small table by the fire. "I help Mrs. Flynn with the household. If you need anything, ring this bell." "How long have you been here?" Clarissa asked. 3 years, Elise smiled. "I know it's frightening now, but truly, this isn't a bad place to be. Lord Blackthorne is fair. The vampires here don't feed on the staff without permission, and the work is easy compared to—" She trailed off, but Clarissa understood. Compared to whatever life she'd escaped. After Elise left, Clarissa forced herself to eat roasted chicken, vegetables that tasted like they'd been grown in heaven, bread still warm from the oven. She was hungrier than she'd realized. The auction house had barely fed them. She was picking at a slice of chocolate cake when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and cold. Her fork clattered to the plate. "Come in." Thomas entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Lord Blackthorne requests your presence in his study. Now?" "He's been patient, miss. Most wouldn't have given you time to settle." Her hands trembled as she set down her napkin. "Do I need to change?" "You're fine as you are." Thomas's voice gentled slightly. "Just be honest with him. He values honesty above all else." The walk through the manor felt endless. Thomas led her down corridors lit by sconces that threw dancing shadows, past rooms whose doors stood open, revealing libraries and parlors and spaces she couldn't identify. Finally, they stopped before double doors of dark wood carved with intricate patterns that seemed to move in her peripheral vision. Thomas knocked once. "Enter." That voice, deep and smooth and absolutely commanding, even through the door it raised goosebumps on her skin. Thomas opened the door but didn't follow her in. "Good luck, miss." Then she was alone. The study was dimmer than the rest of the house, lit only by a fire in a massive hearth and a few strategically placed lamps. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling, thousands of them in languages both familiar and foreign. And there, behind a desk of black wood that gleamed like oil, sat Donovan Blackthorne. He didn't look up immediately. Instead, he continued writing with a fountain pen, his movements precise and unhurried. Clarissa stood in the doorway, uncertain whether to speak or wait or flee. Finally, he set down the pen and raised his eyes to hers. The impact was physical. Those ice-blue eyes weren't just cold, they were ancient, holding centuries of knowledge and power and something that looked almost like pain. His face was even more beautiful up close, all sharp angles and pale perfection, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that should have softened him, but somehow made him more intimidating. "Close the door. Sit." His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room anyway. She obeyed, taking the chair across from his desk, her hands twisted in her lap, the only outlet for her terror. "You're afraid." Not a question. "Yes." Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Good. Fear will keep you alive here." He leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "But I also need honesty. Lies bore me, and I can smell them anyway. What do you want from me?" The question burst out before she could stop it. His eyebrow rose, the first expression she'd seen on that perfect face. Direct. "I appreciate that." He stood, moving to a sideboard where crystal decanters held liquids too dark to be wine. "Would you like a drink?" "I don't drink." "You do tonight." He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, bringing one to her. "Whiskey. Very old, very expensive. It will steady your nerves." She took the glass with shaking hands. He returned to his chair, cradling his own drink, but not drinking. "To answer your question, I don't know yet." That made her look up sharply. "You spent $5 million, and you don't know why?" "I know why I bought you," he corrected. "I don't yet know what I'll do with you. There's a difference." The whiskey burned going down, but warmth spread through her chest. "What's the difference?" Donovan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "I'm 847 years old, Clarissa. I've lived through plagues and wars and the rise and fall of empires. I've loved and lost and learned that everything beautiful eventually dies." He focused on her again. 70 years ago, I stopped participating in the world. I retreated here, to this house, and I've existed rather than lived ever since." His fingers tightened on his glass. "Then tonight, I saw you on that platform, terrified and defiant, and somehow still intact despite everything they'd done to you. And for the first time in 7 decades, I felt something other than boredom." Clarissa's heart hammered. "What did you feel?" "Curiosity." He took a drink, finally, savoring it. "I wanted to know what made you different, why you stood there with your chin up when every other girl was weeping. Why you looked at me without flinching when vampires twice your age won't meet my eyes." She remembered that moment, looking at him and seeing not a buyer, but something that mirrored her own loneliness. "I wasn't brave," she said quietly. "I was past caring. If you were going to hurt me, I didn't want to give you the satisfaction of seeing me break." That answer seemed to please him. His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're under no illusions about what I am. I've read enough history to know what vampires do to humans, especially ones they own. And yet you asked me what I wanted, rather than assuming. Most would have assumed rape, torture, death." Her hands tightened on the glass. "Isn't that what usually happens?" "Sometimes. Often, actually, but not here. Not with me." He set down his drink. "I have no interest in forcing myself on you, Clarissa. The thought repulses me. I've lived too long to find pleasure in suffering." Relief made her light-headed. "Then what? You'll live here. In comfort and safety, you'll have freedom to move through the house and grounds, to read, to pursue whatever interests you have. In return, I require 3 things." She waited, barely breathing. "1, your blood. Twice a week. I'll take it as gently as I can, but I need to feed, and I prefer willing donors." Clarissa nodded slowly. "That wasn't unexpected." 2, your time. I want conversation, companionship, someone who isn't afraid to argue with me or challenge my assumptions. The vampires here are sycophants, and the human staff are too intimidated. You seem capable of neither." That was almost a compliment. "And 3, your music." He gestured to the corner where she finally noticed a grand piano, gleaming black in the firelight. "The auction notes mentioned you were skilled. I want you to play for me." That made her breath catch. "I haven't played in years, not since." Since your father sold your piano to pay his debts? Donovan's voice was matter of fact. I know everything about you, Clarissa. Your childhood training, your mother's death when you were 12, your father's gambling addiction, and eventual suicide. The way you worked 3 jobs trying to pay off his debts until the collectors came and offered you another option. Tears burned her eyes. If you know everything, then you know I'm not worth $5 million. Monetarily, no. But value isn't always measured in money. He stood, moving to the piano, running one pale finger along its edge. I've heard 1,000 pianists over my lifetime, masters who made angels weep, but I haven't heard music played with genuine emotion in longer than I can remember. Everyone performs for me, trying to impress or please or manipulate. I want to hear someone play because they need to, not because they want something. She stood on shaking legs. And if I can't? If my playing disappoints you, then you'll still have a home here, still have safety and comfort. This isn't conditional, Clarissa. Whatever you become to me, you'll never be hurt in this house. The promise in his voice was absolute, backed by centuries of power. Why should I believe you? Because I'm the only vampire lord in 300 miles who hasn't left a trail of drained corpses in his wake. Because my staff lives to old age and retirement with pensions. Because I'm so bored with cruelty and games that the only thing that interests me anymore is genuine connection. He moved closer, and she caught his scent, cold like winter air, but underneath something that made her pulse quicken. And because you have no other choice, that brutal honesty cut through her fear. He was right. She had no family, no money, no skills beyond music and languages that might save her on the street. Here, at least, she had warmth and food and a master who promised not to hurt her. It wasn't freedom, but it was survival. Okay, she said quietly. I'll play for you. I'll give blood. I'll keep you company. But I need something in return. His eyes gleamed with interest. Name it. Teach me what you are. All of it. The history, the politics, the magic, everything. If I'm going to live in this world, I want to understand it. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, for the first time, she saw him truly smile. It transformed his face, making him look almost human, almost young. Done. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? She took his hand, expecting cold. His skin was cool but not freezing, strong fingers closing around hers with careful precision. The touch sent electricity racing up her arm. Agreement, she whispered. Good. He released her hand, but slowly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that felt almost tender. Now play for me. Show me why I was right to buy you. Clarissa moved to the piano on legs that threatened to give out. She hadn't touched keys in 3 years. Her fingers might have forgotten. Her heart might have forgotten. But when she sat on the bench and placed her hands on the ivory, something inside her unlocked. She began with Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major, because it was the first piece her mother had taught her and the last one she'd played before her father sold the piano. The notes came slowly at first, rusty and uncertain. Then muscle memory took over and she stopped thinking, just feeling, behind her. Donovan settled into a chair by the fire. She felt his attention like weight, not oppressive but present, witnessing. The music swelled, pouring out 3 years of grief and anger and fear and desperate hope. Her fingers flew over the keys, coaxing out not perfection but raw emotion, truth wrapped in melody. When the last note faded, silence filled the study. Clarissa's hands trembled in her lap. She'd just bared her soul to a vampire lord who owned her body and blood and everything else. The vulnerability was terrifying. Magnificent. Donovan's voice was thick with something she couldn't name. Absolutely magnificent. She turned to look at him. His eyes had darkened from ice blue to something deeper, more intense. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost alive. You felt every note, he said quietly. Every loss, every moment of loneliness. You weren't performing, you were confessing. Is that bad? It's perfect, he stood, moving toward her. That's exactly what I wanted, what I needed. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that if she leaned forward, she could touch him. You have no idea how long it's been since I've felt anything, Clarissa. Decades of nothing but cold efficiency and blood and waiting for time to end. But just now, listening to you, something inside me. He paused, searching for words, remembered how to feel. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither could name. Then Donovan stepped back, the distance deliberate. It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow we'll establish a routine. She stood, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The adrenaline that had carried her through this impossible day was finally fading. Good night, Lord Blackthorn. Donovan, he corrected. When we're alone, call me Donovan. That felt dangerous, intimate in a way that titles weren't. But she nodded. Good night, Donovan. He watched her walk to the door, and just before she left, his voice stopped her. Clarissa? She turned. Thank you for playing, for being honest, for not pretending to be something you're not. In a world of masks, you're refreshingly real. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and left. But her hand lingered on the doorframe, and she heard herself speak before thought could catch up. Why me? Out of everyone at that auction, all the younger ones, the prettier ones, why did you choose me? Donovan stood perfectly still, silhouetted against the firelight. The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved, crossing the distance between them with that liquid grace that made her breath catch. He stopped close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the single silver thread in his dark hair. Close enough that his scent wrapped around her, cold and dark, and something underneath that made heat pool low in her belly. Because you were the only one who wasn't performing, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Every other girl on that platform was playing a role, frightened virgin, seductive temptress, broken doll, but you, his finger lifted, not quite touching her face, but close enough that she felt the cold radiating from his skin. You were genuinely terrified but still standing straight. You looked at that crowd like you were memorizing their faces for later, like you were already planning how to survive whatever came next. That's not special, Clarissa breathed. That's just not giving up. Exactly, his hand dropped. Most humans give up the moment they learn what we are. They break, or they bargain, or they disappear inside their own minds. But you stayed present, stayed sharp. Even when the auctioneer described you like meat, even when those vampires looked at you like dinner, you never stopped thinking. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. So you bought me because I'm stubborn? I bought you because 800 years of existence has taught me that the most interesting people are the ones who refuse to be defeated by circumstances beyond their control. His ice blue eyes held hers, and because when I looked at you, for the first time in decades, I felt curious. I wanted to know what you were thinking, what you would say if I asked what music lived inside someone who could stand on an auction block and not shatter. The intensity in his gaze made her dizzy. She should step back, create distance, remember what he was. Instead, she found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by something she didn't understand. What if I disappoint you? What if I'm not as interesting as you think? Then I'll be disappointed, but you'll still be safe here. His voice turned gentle, an unexpected softness that made her chest ache. Clarissa, I have endless wealth and unlimited time. The one thing I can't buy or create is genuine human connection. If you turn out to be ordinary, I'll still keep my promises. But somehow, his gaze traveled over her face like a touch. I don't think you're ordinary at all. Her breath came faster, shallower. This was dangerous. He was dangerous, not because he might hurt her, but because of how desperately she wanted to believe him. To trust that this beautiful monster saw something in her worth $5 million beyond her blood. I should go, she managed. Yes, but he didn't move, didn't give her space to slip past. One more thing. She waited, every nerve ending aware of how close he stood. Tomorrow night, I'll need to feed. It will be your first time giving blood, and I want you to understand what that means. Her pulse jumped. The auction house had been very clear about that particular duty. I know what it means. No, his voice went rough. You know the mechanics. Needle in vein, blood in veins. But vampire feeding isn't like a blood donation. When I take from you, you'll feel it. Not just the puncture, but everything that comes after. The draw, the connection, the way your body responds. He paused, his eyes darkening. It's intimate, Clarissa. More intimate than most humans expect. And I need you to be prepared. Heat flooded her face. Are you saying it will feel... She couldn't finish the sentence. Sexual? Yes. His bluntness was startling. Not for me. I'm too old for blood to affect me that way anymore. But for you. His gaze dropped to her throat, where her pulse hammered visibly. Your body will react. Endorphins, adrenaline, pleasure centers lighting up. Some humans find it overwhelming. Others become addicted. I need to know you understand that before we begin. She should be horrified. Should feel violated by the very idea. Instead, she felt that heat spreading lower, her body already betraying her with interest. Will you, her voice came out husky, will you do anything to make it worse? To make me feel more? I'll do everything to make it easier, he corrected. I'll be gentle, I'll only take what I need, and I'll stop if you ask. But I won't lie and say it will be clinical. The connection exists whether either of us wants it or not. His hand finally moved, fingertips ghosting along her jaw so lightly she almost thought she imagined it. I'm telling you this because consent matters to me. If you can't handle that level of intimacy, tell me now. I'll find another way to feed. Clarissa's mind raced. She could refuse, could draw a line here and now. But something in her, something reckless or broken or desperate for connection, wanted to know what it felt like, wanted to experience something that intense, even if it came from a monster. I can handle it, she whispered. Donovan's eyes flashed with something she couldn't name. Approval? Desire? Warning? Are you certain? Because once we start, once that bond forms, it becomes difficult to break. Your body will begin to crave it. To crave me. His thumb brushed her lower lip, cold and perfect and devastating. I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. Her breath caught at the touch, electricity racing down her spine. She should be afraid, should run. Instead, she met his gaze directly. I understand. I'm agreeing. For a long moment, he just stared at her, something dangerous and hungry moving behind his eyes. Then he stepped back abruptly, putting 3 feet of space between them. Tomorrow night, after dinner, come to my chambers. He turned away, his control visibly fraying. Now go, before I forget how to be patient. Clarissa fled. Her legs trembled as she walked down the corridor, her skin burning where he'd touched her. The house that had seemed less threatening moments ago now felt charged with possibility and danger. In her room, she pressed her back against the closed door, breathing hard. Her hand rose to her lips, where his thumb had brushed. The skin still tingled, cold fire that wouldn't fade. What was she doing? Agreeing to let him feed from her, to create an intimate bond that would make her crave him. She was insane. Had to be. Trauma and Stockholm Syndrome and pure desperation. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his face in the firelight, saw centuries of loneliness in those ice-blue eyes, heard the rough honesty in his voice when he admitted he wanted connection. He'd been alone for 800 years. She'd been alone for 3. Maybe they could be alone together. Maybe that was enough. She pushed off the door and moved to the window. Snow fell heavier now, blanketing the grounds in white. Somewhere in this massive estate, Donovan was probably doing the same thing, standing at a window, wondering if he'd made a mistake. If buying a human slave to ease his loneliness was the act of a monster or just someone too tired of being empty. Clarissa pressed her palm against the cold glass. Tomorrow night, she would give him her blood, would let him inside her in a way she'd never let anyone, would take the first real step into his world. The terrifying part wasn't that she had to do it. The terrifying part was how much she wanted to. Sleep should have come easily after the day's terrors. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Donovan had spoken. He'd promised safety, promised she wouldn't be hurt, promised her life could be more than survival. And the terrifying thing was, she believed him. Even more terrifying, the way her skin still tingled where he'd touched her hand, the way her heart had raced when he stood close, the way she'd wanted, just for a second, for him to reach out and… She forced the thought away. He was a vampire, 847 years old. He'd bought her like property. Any attraction she felt was just trauma and fear and the desperate human need to please captors. Nothing more. But as sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed not of monsters, but of ice-blue eyes that held centuries of loneliness. And when she woke the next morning to find snow falling outside her window and breakfast waiting by the fire, she realized with creeping dread that surviving Donovan Blackthorne might be the easy part. Learning not to want him might be impossible. Clarissa woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to curtain. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all crashed back. The auction, the vampire, the piano, the promise. She sat up slowly, half expecting the room to dissolve like a dream. But no, the four-poster bed was real. The fire still crackling in the hearth was real, and the snow falling outside was real. So was her new life. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in, Mrs. Flynn entered carrying fresh clothes. "Morning, dear. I've brought you something more appropriate than pajamas. Breakfast is in 30 minutes. Downstairs in the morning room." Clarissa took the offered clothes, soft wool pants, and a cashmere sweater in deep burgundy, real shoes, not slippers. "Where is… Lord Blackthorne is in his study, same as every morning, Mrs. Flynn's expression was kind, but firm. "You'll see him tonight for dinner. During the day, you're to familiarize yourself with the house and grounds. There's a library you'll want to see." The library was the first place she went after breakfast. 3 stories of books, with spiral staircases connecting levels and reading nooks tucked into alcoves. Clarissa wandered the aisles in awe, running her fingers along spines in a dozen languages. Ancient texts bound in leather, modern novels in pristine condition, everything from philosophy to physics to poetry. You'll find the music theory section on the 2nd level. "East wall." Donovan's voice came from above. She looked up to find him leaning over the 3rd floor railing, watching her with those penetrating ice-blue eyes. He wore different clothes than last night, charcoal pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with strength. "I thought you'd be sleeping." "Vampires don't need much sleep, especially old ones." He descended the stairs with fluid grace. "I rest a few hours around dawn, then I'm functional until the next sunrise." "That must be lonely." The words slipped out before she could censor them. He reached the ground floor, studying her with an intensity that made her want to fidget. "Yes, it is. Most people don't think about that." Clarissa shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Most people probably don't think about you as a person at all, just a monster." His smile was sharp. "And you?" Still deciding, she met his gaze. "But I think monsters don't spend 800 years building libraries." Something flickered in his expression, too quick to catch. "Come, I want to show you something." He led her to a section she hadn't noticed, hidden behind a bookcase that swung open at his touch. Beyond was a smaller room, intimate and warm, lined with instruments. Violins, cellos, a harp, wind instruments she couldn't name. And in the center, another piano. "This was my wife's music room," Donovan said quietly. "She died 300 years ago." "I haven't let anyone in here since." Clarissa's breath caught. "Why show me?" "Because you understand loss," He moved to the piano, running his hand over the closed lid. And because music belongs in this room again, it's been silent too long. She wanted to ask about his wife, wanted to know everything, but the grief in his voice, ancient and still sharp, stopped her. Instead, she asked, "May I?" He gestured permission. Clarissa opened the piano lid, revealing keys that gleamed despite centuries. She played a single note, perfect pitch, despite the age. Donovan was watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Play whatever you want, whenever you want, this room is yours now." The gift was enormous, the trust implicit in it staggering. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Clarissa? Yes? You're free to explore anywhere except the East Wing. That's," he hesitated, "private. Understood." After he left, she stood alone in the room that had belonged to a vampire's dead wife, surrounded by instruments that had been silent for 3 centuries. The weight of it should have crushed her. Instead, she felt purpose stirring. This was how she could repay his kindness, with music. With life breathed back into this mausoleum of memories, she played for hours, losing herself in melodies both learned and improvised. When she finally emerged, she found Elise waiting with lunch. "Lord Blackthorn asked that you eat," she said with a smile. "He says artists forget to feed themselves." That evening, Clarissa dressed carefully for dinner. Mrs. Flynn had provided an entire wardrobe, elegant without being ostentatious. She chose a dress of deep blue silk that made her pale skin glow and left her shoulders bare. She told herself it wasn't to impress anyone, just to feel human again after so many weeks of degradation. The dining room was intimate, a table set for 2 with candles and crystal. Donovan stood when she entered, and for a moment she saw appreciation flash in his eyes before his customary control returned. "You look lovely." "Thank you." She took the seat he pulled out, trying not to notice how his fingers brushed her shoulders. The meal was exquisite. 7 courses, each more delicious than the last. Donovan ate nothing, of course, just sipped wine that was probably older than countries, while watching her with those ancient eyes. "Tell me about your life before," he said finally. "Before my father's debts, or before my mother died?" "Both." So she did. She told him about growing up with music, about her mother's gentle teaching and her father's slow descent into addiction after the loss, about working herself nearly to death trying to save him from himself, about the morning she found him in the garage, engine running, choosing death over dishonor. Donovan listened without interruption, his expression unchanged but his eyes growing somehow warmer. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You blame yourself. Every day. For not seeing the signs, for not, I don't know, loving him enough to make him want to stay. That's not how addiction works." "I know." She took a shaky breath. "But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are different things." He reached across the table, his cool fingers covering hers. "I watched my wife waste away from consumption. I was powerful enough to turn her, to save her, but she refused. Said she'd lived her natural span and wouldn't curse herself to eternity." He squeezed her hand gently. "I begged her, offered her everything. She died anyway, and I blamed myself for 300 years for not turning her against her will. Do you still blame yourself?" Every day, his thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture unconscious and devastating. "The knowledge and feeling gap doesn't close, we just learn to live in it." The touch was doing dangerous things to her composure. She should pull away, re-establish distance. Instead, her fingers curled around his. "I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for yours." He released her hand slowly, the absence of his touch leaving her skin cold. "Now, shall we discuss your duties?" "Right, duties." She forced herself to focus. "Blood twice a week, you said." He nodded. "Tomorrow evening. If you're willing, I'll make it as comfortable as possible. I promise." "And the companionship? Dinner like this, Most evenings, conversation, chess if you play, walks through the grounds when weather permits. He paused. And I'd like you to attend the Christmas gathering. Clarissa blinked. Christmas gathering? It's a tradition, Donovan explained. Every year, the vampire lords of the region meet here for the winter solstice. Politics mostly, but it's expected. I haven't brought a companion to these events in. He trailed off. Ever, since your wife. His jaw tightened. You'd be making a statement. About me? About us. That you're under my protection. That anyone who harms you answers to me. His eyes met hers. It will mark you in their world, Clarissa. Once they see you at my side, you'll be forever associated with me. And if I don't want that, then you don't attend. I'll make excuses. But, he leaned forward, and she felt the weight of his full attention. I think you do want it. I think you're tired of being invisible, of being prey. This would make you untouchable. The appeal was visceral. She'd spent weeks being examined like meat, being touched and assessed and degraded. The idea of walking into a room of vampires as Donovan Blackthorn's companion, protected and valued, was intoxicating. What would I have to do? Stand beside me? Look beautiful? Let them see that I treasure you. His voice dropped. That's all. Just be yourself. That's all felt like everything. When is it? December 21st, 2 weeks from now. Say, yes, Clarissa, let me give you this. She thought about the auction, about the guard's hands on her body, about standing on that platform in near nothing while monsters bit on her flesh. Then she thought about walking into a room of those same monsters on Donovan's arm, untouchable, transformed from commodity to person. Yes. His smile was swift and genuine. Excellent. We'll need to get you proper attire, Mrs. Flynn will handle it. For now, shall we retire to the study? The routine they fell into over the next week was surprisingly comfortable. Mornings she spent in the music room or library. Afternoons exploring the vast grounds with their frozen gardens and snow-covered statuary. Evenings were for dinner and conversation and, increasingly, stolen moments where Donovan's control slipped and she glimpsed the man beneath the vampire. Like when he laughed at her terrible joke about Beethoven. The sound was rusty, unpracticed, but genuine. Or when she caught him watching her play with an expression of such longing, it stole her breath. Or the night she asked about his turning and he told her everything. The Black Death, the choice between death and immortality, the centuries of learning to be monster and man simultaneously. The blood-taking came on the 7th day. She was more nervous than she wanted to admit, sitting in his study while he prepared. He'd explained the process, a small cut, his mouth on her wrist, a few minutes of feeding. Clinical, controlled, nothing like the violent fantasies her imagination conjured. Ready? He knelt before her chair, cradling her hand in both of his. She nodded, not trusting her voice. I'll be gentle, I promise. You can tell me to stop at any time. The cut was swift, a small blade across her inner wrist. Blood welled, dark and red. Donovan's eyes flashed, pupils dilating, and for the first time she saw his fangs, long and wickedly sharp. Then his mouth was on her wrist. The sensation was nothing like she expected. Not pain but pleasure, sharp and shocking and utterly consuming. Her body responded instantly, heat flooding her core, her back arching slightly as waves of sensation rolled through her. Donovan's eyes met hers, and she saw awareness there, knowledge of what he was doing to her. One hand slid to her knee, steadying her, the cool touch of his fingers against her skin making her gasp. He drank deeply but carefully, each pull of his mouth sending electricity racing through her veins. She felt dizzy, not from blood loss but from the intimacy of it, from the way his thumb traced circles on her knee, from the sound he made deep in his throat that was almost a moan. When he finally pulled back, sealing the wound with his tongue, she was shaking. Donovan rocked back on his heels, his eyes nearly black now, his lips stained crimson. Forgive me, His voice was rough. "I didn't expect. Your blood is—" He stopped, visibly composing himself. "Extraordinary." Clarissa's heart hammered. "That was, I know." He stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "It won't be that intense next time. First feeding is always—" He trailed off. "Always what?" "Overwhelming, for both of us." He turned away, gripping the edge of his desk. "You should rest. You'll be weak for a few hours." She stood on shaky legs, but before she could leave, she had to ask, "Donovan, did you feel it too? What happened?" He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Yes, I felt everything you did, every pulse of pleasure, every moment of connection." His hands tightened on the desk. "That's never happened before in 800 years. The confession hung between them, enormous and terrifying. "Good night, Clarissa." His voice was strained. "Good night." She fled to her room and collapsed on the bed, her body still humming from his touch, from his mouth on her skin. She was in trouble. Deep, dangerous trouble. Because she wasn't just surviving Donovan Blackthorne anymore. She was falling for him. The days leading up to the Christmas gathering passed in a haze of preparation. Mrs. Flynn brought seamstresses who fitted Clarissa for a gown that made her gasp. Midnight blue silk that clung to every curve, with a neckline that dipped low and a back that was nearly non-existent. Diamond pins for her hair, shoes that cost more than she'd earned in a year of work. "You'll be the most beautiful woman there, Mrs. Flynn said with satisfaction. "That's not the point," Clarissa protested. "Isn't it?" The housekeeper's eyes were knowing. "Lord Blackthorne has been alone for so long. To see him smile again, to hear him laugh, it's like watching spring return to winter. Don't break his heart, child. He's more fragile than he appears." "I won't." The promise felt enormous. "I couldn't." During their second feeding, the intensity was less shocking but somehow more dangerous. She was prepared for the pleasure, expected the heat. What she wasn't prepared for was the tenderness. The way Donovan held her hand afterward, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin. The way he whispered her name like a prayer. The way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in his ancient world. They were crossing lines neither acknowledged, touches that lasted too long, looks that held too much meaning. The night before the gathering, he asked her to play for him. Not just music, but the piece that meant the most. She chose her mother's lullaby. The melody was simple, childlike, but she poured everything into it. All her grief and longing and the fragile hope that maybe she could be happy again. When she finished, she found Donovan standing beside the piano, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. "You're destroying me," he whispered. "Every moment with you. You're unmaking 800 years of careful control. Is that bad?" "I don't know." His thumb traced her lower lip, and she stopped breathing. "All I know is I haven't felt alive in 3 centuries. And when I'm with you, I remember what it was like to have a heartbeat." The moment stretched, charged, and dangerous. She knew if she leaned forward, if she closed the distance between them, he would kiss her, would claim her mouth with the same intensity he'd claimed her blood. But something held her back. Fear, wisdom, the knowledge that once they crossed that line, there would be no going back. She would be his in every way that mattered, and he would be hers. Donovan seemed to wage the same internal battle. Finally, he stepped back, the loss of his touch almost painful. "Tomorrow," he said, voice rough. "Tomorrow they'll all see what you mean to me." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Tomorrow." He left her in the music room, and Clarissa sat at the piano for hours afterward, trying to calm her racing heart, trying to understand what was happening between them, trying to reconcile the vampire lord who'd bought her with the man who looked at her like she held his salvation. Sleep came late and brought dreams of ice-blue eyes and cool hands and a kiss that never happened but felt inevitable. The morning of the gathering, the entire house transformed. Staff Clarissa had never seen appeared from somewhere, decorating with evergreen and holly and candles in every window. The great hall was opened, a space so vast it could hold hundreds. With a ceiling painted like the night sky, Donovan found her watching the preparations. Nervous? Terrified, she admitted. They'll see right through me. See what? That I'm just a human girl playing dress-up in a vampire's world. He moved closer, his presence always both threat and comfort. You're not just anything, Clarissa. You're the woman who plays music that makes centuries-old vampires remember their humanity. You're the woman who looks at me and sees a person, not a monster. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. You're mine, and I don't share what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her belly. The first guests arrived at sunset. Clarissa watched from an upstairs window as sleek cars deposited beings that wore beauty like weapons. Women in gowns that cost fortunes, men in suits tailored to perfection, all of them moving with predatory grace, all of them vampires. Mrs. Flynn appeared with the dress. Time to transform, dear. The transformation took 2 hours. Hair swept up with diamond pins, makeup that made her eyes look huge and her lips fuller, the gown that fit like it had been painted on. When Clarissa finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The girl who'd stood on an auction platform in rags was gone. In her place stood a woman who could almost belong in a vampire's world. Donovan was waiting at the bottom of the grand staircase. When he saw her, everything in him went still. He wore a suit of black so deep it seemed to absorb light, with a shirt of silver gray that made his eyes glow. He looked like death and sex and power wrapped in civilized clothing. He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. Transcendent. She descended the stairs slowly, hyper-aware of his gaze, tracking every movement. When she reached him, he took her hand and brought it to his lips. For a moment, she thought he might actually kiss her. Instead, he pressed his mouth to her pulse point, his fangs grazing her skin so lightly she shivered. Mine, he breathed against her wrist. Tonight, everyone will know it. Then he offered his arm, and together they walked into the great hall where 200 vampires waited to judge her. The room fell silent when they entered, every eye fixed on them, assessing, calculating, seeing the human girl on Donovan Blackthorn's arm and drawing conclusions. He led her to the center of the room, to a raised dais where 2 throne-like chairs waited. She'd expected him to introduce her, to make some speech. Instead, he simply pulled her close, his hand settling possessively on her lower back, and surveyed his guests with eyes gone cold. She's under my protection. His voice carried through the vast space without effort. Her name is Clarissa. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Anyone who harms her dies. Clear? The silence that followed was absolute. Then, as one, the assembled vampires bowed their heads in acknowledgement. Donovan guided her to the throne, seating her beside him. Musicians began playing, conversations resumed, and the gathering officially began. But Clarissa felt the stares, felt the speculation. She was the story of the evening, the human who'd captured the attention of the most powerful vampire lord in the region. A woman approached, beautiful and dangerous in crimson silk. Lord Blackthorn. Her voice was smooth as honey. It's been too long since you graced us with your presence at gatherings. We've missed you, Lady Victoria. Donovan's tone was polite but cold. May I introduce Clarissa? Lady Victoria's eyes, green as poison, swept over her. Charming, quite the unusual choice for a companion. She's not a choice, Donovan said quietly, his hand tightening on Clarissa's. She's a necessity. The admission sent electricity through the room. Vampires leaned closer, sensing drama. Clarissa forced herself to meet Lady Victoria's gaze without flinching. A pleasure to meet you, my lady. The vampire's laugh was like breaking glass. Well, she has manners at least. Tell me, Girl, what makes you worthy of our Lord's attention? What makes you think worth is something you can judge? The words came from somewhere deep, some reserve of strength Clarissa didn't know she possessed. He values me. That's all that matters. Lady Victoria's eyes flashed with anger, but before she could respond, Donovan stood. If you'll excuse us, it's time for the demonstration. He led Clarissa through the crowd to where a piano had been positioned near the massive fireplace. Her heart stopped. What demonstration? I need them to understand why you're special, he said quietly, to see what I see. Play for them, Clarissa. Show them your gift. Panic clawed at her throat. I can't perform in front of. You already have, for me, every night this week. This is no different. It was entirely different. These were vampires who'd heard centuries of music, who'd attended performances by masters long dead. She was just a girl with some training and too much emotion. Donovan seemed to sense her fear. He lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. I believe in you. Now believe in yourself. Then he stepped back, and she was alone at the piano with 200 predators watching. Her hands shook as she sat. The keys gleamed under candlelight, waiting. She could run, could refuse, she could play. She could show them that she was more than meat, more than a pretty face on Donovan's arm. She could prove she belonged here. Her fingers found the keys. She began with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, because it was beautiful and melancholy and perfectly matched the winter night. But as she played, something shifted. The music became more than notes. It became a language, speaking to the parts of these ancient beings they'd buried under centuries of control. She poured everything into it, her fear, her longing, her impossible growing feelings for a vampire lord who looked at her like she held his salvation. The music swelled and broke and reformed, building to a crescendo that left the air trembling. When the last note faded, the silence was deafening. Clarissa sat frozen, terrified to look up, terrified to see disappointment or mockery. Then someone began to clap. She looked up to find Donovan standing, applauding with hands that moved almost too fast to see. One by one, the other vampires joined until the entire hall thundered with appreciation. Lady Victoria approached the piano, and Clarissa braced for cruelty. Instead, the vampire's eyes held something almost like respect. I stand corrected, she said quietly. You are extraordinary. After that, the evening blurred. Vampires approached to compliment her playing, to introduce themselves, to acknowledge her place at Donovan's side. She was no longer the human curiosity but the companion of Lord Blackthorn, the woman with the gift that made immortals feel mortal. Through it all, Donovan stayed close, his hand never far from hers, his eyes tracking every interaction. When a male vampire held her hand too long, Donovan's growl was soft but unmistakable. When another suggested she might play at his estate, Donovan's refusal was absolute. She's mine. He kept saying it, over and over, staking his claim for everyone to hear. And the terrifying thing? Clarissa didn't want to object. As midnight approached, Donovan led her onto the balcony for air. Snow fell softly beyond the protection of the overhang, and the sounds of the party faded to a distant murmur. You were magnificent, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I knew you would be, but seeing it, the pride in his tone made her chest tight. Thank you for believing in me. Always, he turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. Clarissa, I need to tell you something. What? I'm falling in love with you. The confession crashed through her like a tidal wave. I know I shouldn't. I know you're human, and I'm a monster, and this can only end in tragedy. But I can't help it. You've awakened something in me I thought died with my wife, and I need you to know, even if you don't feel the same, even if this terrifies you. Her hand covered his mouth, silencing him. I'm falling for you too, she whispered. I know it's crazy. I know it's impossible. But I am. His eyes closed, and for a moment, he just breathed. When he opened them again, they blazed with need, May I kiss you? The question was gentle, giving her all the power, despite the hunger radiating from him. Yes, please, yes. He kissed her like a man dying of thirst, finally finding water. His mouth claimed hers with centuries of longing, his hands cradling her face like she was made of spun glass and infinite value simultaneously. She melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his with a need that shocked her. He tasted like winter and wine and forever. The kiss deepened, his tongue sliding against hers, drawing a moan from her throat that made him growl in response. His hand slid down her back, following the bare skin exposed by her gown, and everywhere he touched, fire followed. When they finally broke apart, both were shaking. Donovan rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard, despite not needing air. "We should stop. We should," she agreed, but neither moved. The party continued inside, but out here in the snow and shadows, they were creating their own celebration. One kiss became 2, became 10, became an eternity of discovery. She learned the texture of his lips, the strength in his hands, the sound he made when she bit his lower lip gently. He learned the curve of her throat, the sensitive spot behind her ear, the way she gasped when he pressed her against the balcony wall and kissed his way down her neck. "Lord Blackthorn," a voice called from inside. "A word, if you will." They broke apart reluctantly. Donovan's eyes were nearly black with desire, his hair messed from her fingers. "Give me a moment," Clarissa whispered. "I'll wait forever if needed." He kissed her once more, soft and sweet, before returning inside. Clarissa leaned against the railing, trying to catch her breath and steady her racing heart. She'd just kissed a vampire, was falling in love with a vampire, had basically agreed to spend her life with an immortal being who could drain her dry with one bite. The smart thing would be to run, but as she watched Donovan through the window, saw him navigate the political waters of vampire society while casting glances back at her, she knew running was impossible. She'd found something here, something precious and rare and worth fighting for. Inside, the gathering was breaking up. Vampires bid their farewells, casting knowing looks at Clarissa as they left. She'd marked herself tonight, and everyone knew it. When the last guest departed, Donovan returned to her side. "Walk with me?" Through the house they wandered, not speaking, just being together, in comfortable silence. Finally, they reached her door. Donovan turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Tonight changes everything," he said quietly. "They'll expect. I know. Will you let me court you properly? Despite everything, despite owning you legally, I want to earn you." The old-fashioned phrasing made her smile. "I'd like that." "Good." He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then, finally, softly, her lips. "Sleep well, Clarissa. You too, Donovan." She slipped inside and closed the door, leaning against it as she listened to his footsteps fade. Her hand rose to her lips, still tingling from his kisses. Through the door, she heard him pause, heard the slight intake of breath that suggested he was struggling with the same need that burned through her. Then his footsteps continued, growing distant until silence reclaimed the corridor. Clarissa moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Below, the snow-covered ground stretched endlessly, transformed into something from a fairy tale. But this wasn't a story where the princess needed saving. This was something else entirely. A choice made freely, a love chosen despite impossible odds. A future written by two lonely souls who'd found each other in the darkness. She thought about the auction platform, about standing there in chains being sold like property. That girl had been broken, terrified, certain her life was over, but that girl had also been strong enough to survive. Strong enough to play music that made ancient vampires weep. Strong enough to look at a monster and see a man. Strong enough to fall in love despite every reason not to. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Donovan standing there, his control clearly shattered. "I can't." He started, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I know I said goodnight, I know I should let you rest, but He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so human it made her heart ache. I've been alone for 300 years, Clarissa. And now that I've tasted what it feels like to not be alone, I can't walk away. Not tonight. She reached for his hand, pulling him inside and closing the door. Then don't. He stared at her, hunger and hope warring in his expression. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to stay with me. She moved closer, her hands sliding up his chest. I'm asking you to hold me while I sleep. I'm asking you to stop being alone, even if just for one night. His arms came around her with devastating gentleness, pulling her against him until she could feel the stillness where a heartbeat should be. This is dangerous, he whispered against her hair. If you stay, I won't be afraid. She lifted her face to his. And neither will you. He kissed her then, deep and claiming and tender all at once. When they finally broke apart, he lifted her effortlessly and carried her to the bed. But instead of the passion that had burned between them on the balcony, he simply held her, his body wrapped around hers like a shield against the world. This is all I wanted, he murmured as she settled against his chest. Just this. Just you. Warm and safe in my arms. Clarissa tangled their fingers together. Tell me about her, about your wife. Are you certain? I want to know everything about you, even the painful parts. So he told her. About meeting Catherine in a village during the plague years. About how she'd nursed him back to health before either knew what he was. About their wedding under an oak tree and their years of happiness. About watching her grow old while he stayed frozen. About her final days when she refused his offer of immortality because she believed in heaven and wanted to see her parents again. I held her as she died. Donovan's voice was thick with ancient grief, much like this, and I swore I'd never let myself care for anyone that deeply again. But here I am, 3 centuries later, holding another woman who makes me forget why I wanted to stay alone. Clarissa turned in his arms to face him. I'm not replacing her. Good. Because you couldn't. She was spring and flowers and laughter. His thumb brushed her cheek. You're winter and music and strength. You're entirely your own person. And I love you for exactly who you are, not as a substitute for who I lost. The confession settled over them like snow. I love you too, Clarissa whispered. I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. But somewhere between the auction and tonight, you became everything to me. They lay tangled together as the hours passed, sometimes talking, sometimes kissing, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. Donovan told her stories from centuries past. She told him about her dreams for the future. He explained vampire politics and the significance of what she'd done tonight. She asked questions about his powers, his life, his loneliness. As dawn approached, he stirred. I should go, the sun. I had blackout curtains installed yesterday, Clarissa admitted. Mrs. Flynn thought I was crazy, wanting to block out all the light, but I thought, maybe someday. Her cheeks flushed. Maybe you'd want to stay. His expression transformed, wonder and love and gratitude washing over features usually so controlled. You planned for this? For us? I hoped for it, she corrected. There's a difference. Donovan kissed her with a tenderness that made tears prick her eyes. Then he rose and drew the heavy curtains, plunging the room into darkness. When he returned to bed, he pulled her close again. Sleep, he commanded gently. I'll keep watch. But you need to rest too. I'll rest knowing you're safe. That's all I need. Clarissa drifted off to the sound of him humming softly. A melody she didn't recognize, but that sounded like love. When she woke hours later, sunlight tried valiantly to penetrate the curtains but failed. Donovan still held her, his eyes closed in something that looked like peace. She studied his face in the dim light, memorizing every perfect line. This was her future now. This vampire lord who'd bought her body but somehow won her heart. this ancient being who'd been alone for 300 years until a terrified girl on an auction platform caught his attention. This was impossible and beautiful and absolutely real. His eyes opened, immediately focusing on her. "Good morning. Good afternoon. Probably," she smiled. "How do you feel?" "Complete." The word was simple but weighted with centuries of meaning. "For the first time since Catherine died, I feel complete." "Me too," she kissed him softly. "What happens now?" "Now," he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We build a life together. However long you'll have me." "Forever sounds good," Clarissa said, "even though forever for me is much shorter than forever for you. Then I'll treasure every moment." He pulled her closer. "Every day, every hour, every breath you take, I'll treasure all of it." They stayed in bed until evening, talking and touching and learning each other. When Mrs. Flynn knocked with dinner, they emerged, disheveled and glowing. The housekeeper took one look at them and smiled. "About time, my lord." Donovan actually laughed. Indeed, that night, they played piano together in his wife's music room, her skill and his knowledge combining into something neither could create alone. Later, they walked the snowy grounds hand in hand while he pointed out constellations he'd watched for centuries. And when dawn approached again, she pulled him back to her room, back to her bed, back to her arms. Days turned into weeks. The routine they established was simple but perfect. Mornings spent reading in the library while he handled estate business. Afternoons playing music or walking or simply being together. Evenings feeding, the intimate ritual that bound them closer each time. Nights wrapped in each other, talking or kissing or lost in pleasure that left them both breathless. The other vampire lords accepted her presence, some with grudging respect, others with genuine warmth. She became known in their world not as Lord Blackthorn's possession, but as his equal, his companion, his love. And when Christmas came, true Christmas with gifts and laughter and joy, Clarissa realized something profound. She'd been bought as a slave but had become a partner. She'd been sold to a monster and found a man. She'd lost her freedom and gained everything that mattered. On Christmas morning, Donovan presented her with a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, delicate gold with a single diamond. "It's not a wedding ring," he explained, his voice nervous in a way she'd never heard. "Not yet, but it's a promise that you belong to no one but yourself, that I'll love you until the stars burn out, that whatever time we have together, I'll make every moment count." Clarissa slipped the ring on, watching it catch the light. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You're perfect." And when he kissed her, surrounded by the music room filled with instruments that sang again after 300 years of silence, she knew she'd found her home. Not in the estate or the wealth or even the safety, but in the arms of a vampire lord who'd bought her body and won her heart, who'd been alone for centuries until one terrified girl remembered how to make him feel, who loved her not, despite her humanity but because of it. This was her happy ending, and their beautiful beginning,